TV neighbor Fred Rogers was more than just a kind neighbor. He fought. In a Burger King commercial from 1984, a phony Mr. Rodney was promoting hamburgers. Fred made one call. Overnight, the ad vanished. He wasn't simply upset when the KKK used his voice to target youngsters with racist remarks. He started a lawsuit. Even this gentleman wouldn't cross that boundary, though. Fred took action when he was pressured by producers to surrender his principles. Nobody anticipated. Let's explore the entire tale. In Latrobe, Pennsylvania, on March 20, 1928, Fred Rogers was born. He came from a rich household. His father was a businessman, and they had a large brick home with all the amenities a child could desire: toys, music, and books. Fred, however, felt unlucky. He spent most of his time indoors due to health issues. Fred watched from the window while other children played outside. Despite the comforts all around him, he still felt isolated. He was formed by the solitude. He gained the ability to feel other people's emotions as a result. He used that emotion later in life to make kids feel loved and seen. Fred had been sick a lot as a kid. Due to his asthma, he was confined to his house for weeks. His mom sought to improve the situation. She played the piano with him and sewed him puppets. The loneliness persisted, though, and the days were long. In addition, he became introverted and put on weight. He was quiet during class. He observed people, yet he had few friends. He observed their feelings, their joy, their sorrow, their anxieties. Later, millions more children would be able to understand him thanks to that subtle talent. Fred never forgot anything that happened to him when he was about 11 years old. He became known as Fat Freddy by some of the lads in his area. One day, they laughed and yelled as they chased him for 11 blocks. Fred felt frightened. He was embarrassed and hurt, and he was out of breath. I was scarred by that incident. It gave him a purpose, though. On his show, he would subsequently discuss bullying. As someone who had experienced it firsthand, rather than as a teacher. He demonstrated to children how to be kind, deal with grief, and advocate for themselves. One person in particular gave little Fred a sense of total affection. Fred McFeely was his granddad. Fred went to the farm with his grandfather every Sunday. He felt free there. He could be himself, explore nature, and run in the fields. "Just by being you, Freddie, you make my day very special," his grandfather would say. He would always remember those words. They provided him with courage when he felt unworthy. Later, he honored the man who made him feel unique simply for being alive by naming a character on his show Mr. McFeely. Change began in high school. When Fred first started at Latrobe High, he was a timid, fat student who was still burdened by bullying. However, a pupil by the name of Jim Stumbaugh made contact with him and became a friend. Because of that friendship, Fred came out of his shell. He got involved in school activities and found he had a knack for leadership. Fred rose to the position of president of the student council by his last year. He became active in theater, public speaking, and music. He eventually started to trust in himself, shed weight, and gained confidence. The trip showed him the strength of friendship and kindness by transforming him from a timid boy to a leader. Fred enrolled at Dartmouth in 1946 but left after a year to attend Rollins College in Florida. That decision altered everything. Fred found music in Rollins. He wrote more than 200 pieces after studying it in great detail. He earned a degree in music composition with honors in 1951. He composed a piano sonata for his senior thesis. The music was not limited to the classroom. Through his program, it would subsequently warm children's hearts. His soft tunes become instruments for teaching children about love, emotions, and fears. Fred saw a television for the first time when he visited his family the same year. He watched a show that was full of pies, faces, and slapstick. He refrained from laughing. He was upset. Perhaps, he thought, something lovely. Why is it being squandered? It struck him hard. It wasn't merely a fleeting idea. That realization changed my life. He made the decision to enter the television industry at that time, not to gain fame but to use it to benefit kids. He was made aware of the power and positive possibilities of media by that one black and white screen. In 1951, Fred made the move to New York and began to work at NBC. On popular series like Your Hit Parade and The Voice of Firestone, he worked behind the scenes. In live production, stage changes, and props, he provided assistance. NBC produced more than 1,000 hours of live programming every week. Despite the chaos, Fred gained a lot of knowledge. Something didn't feel quite right, though. He witnessed how sponsors and money dominated everything. He didn't enjoy the commercials, the noise, and the callousness. His decision was made evident by that incident. Being on commercial TV was not something he desired. Consequently, Fred left that world in 1953. He was not interested in chasing ratings. Helping youngsters grow was his goal. In addition to attending a Pittsburgh seminary, he studied child development under Dr. Margaret McFarland. Faith was not the only thing he was learning. He was learning how to communicate with children in a meaningful way, as well as about their feelings. That was a strange route. The majority chose just one item. 3 was his choice: media, spirituality, and psychology. This combination would later make his show unique on television. Fred returned to Pittsburgh that year and joined a new initiative called WQED, which was the country's first community-funded educational television station. A restored mansion served as the station's launch location in 1954. Despite their lack of resources and personnel, they had huge ideas. He was the sole puppeteer at WQED and the co-producer. And even gave a live organ performance. This production was not a high-end production. Behind the scenes, Fred was quietly working on something extraordinary. He created the puppet family Daniel Striped Tiger, Henrietta Pussycat, Queen Sarah Saturday, King Friday the 13th, X the Owl, and Lady Elaine Fairchild. Many of them were named after actual individuals in his life, such as his wife, friends, and co-workers. The program was intended to be straightforward and serve only as an introduction to short children's movies. Rogers transformed it into something much more significant. He created intricate plots and infused each puppet with a distinct personality. What was the outcome? The Children's Corner took home the Best Locally Produced Children's Show Sylvania Award in 1955. Even NBC broadcast it nationwide. But Fred didn't want the attention. The music and the puppets spoke for him. Rogers also did something that most people wouldn't dare. Seminary was his place. He began attending Pittsburgh Theological Seminary in 1955 while continuing to work at WQED full-time. He kept working at his day job. He crammed classes into his lunch breaks instead. 8 long years passed throughout this double life. Sometimes he wouldn't even step out of his work clothes to sprint from the studio to the seminary and back. In addition, he and co-host Josie Carey made the weekly trip to New York to perform live. However, he continued his studies. He didn't want to be a preacher. A pulpit was not what he wanted. His goal was to use television to uplift the spirits and intellects of children. For this reason, he chose not to go to a church after he eventually graduated in 1963. In the studio, he remained. However, in that same year, something remarkable occurred. As a Presbyterian minister, Fred Rogers was ordained to serve children via television, not to head a church. This was the first ordination of its sort. The church recognized he didn't need pews and 4 walls after observing what he was doing. He was in possession of a camera. And he was able to reach millions with his webcam. He used every song, puppet show, and occasion to convey a message of acceptance, love, and emotional openness. Most people forget the turning point that followed. Rogers traveled to Canada in 1963. Mr. Rogers, a 15-minute program that ran for 337 episodes, was produced by him there at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Initially made an appearance on camera. He had remained in the background up until that point, but CBC chief Fred Rainsbury persuaded him to take center stage. It was not simple. Rogers was insecure and bashful, but this Canadian version was the turning point. His soft style evolved. Talked directly to children and started creating what would eventually become the Pretend Neighborhood. The world's first impression of Mr. Rogers was influenced by that early Canadian performance. In 1966, Fred Rogers didn't simply return to Pittsburgh, he carried something significant with him. After working on an early version of his children's show for a few years in Canada, he purchased the rights and made a new start at the local public television station, WQED. He combined new concepts that were more centered on actual events with elements from his previous program, such as the neighborhood of make-believe. Initially, it was only broadcast in Pittsburgh, but later received financing from the Sears Roebuck Foundation. That was the turning point. On February 19, 1968, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which subsequently changed its name to PBS, went national on the internet. It wasn't just another children's program. The majority of children's television in those days was slapstick-filled, fast-paced, and loud. In contrast, Rogers did the reverse. He decelerated the pace. He made it feel peaceful and secure. And by the early 1970s, that modest little show had gained widespread recognition. It ran for around 1,000 episodes over more than 30 years. But just the stats don't tell the entire tale. Rogers established a tone from the first minute of the broadcast every day. After singing his theme song and changing into sneakers and a cardigan, he entered the room. It wasn't random and turned into a ritual. He did everything to make kids feel at ease. Also, the sweaters were unique. Everyone had been hand-knitted by his mother till her death in 1981. The Smithsonian acquired the renowned red cardigan. He did, however, wear green cardigans more frequently, which is a nice fact. Rogers was unaware of that. He was colorblind in red and green. Children were nonetheless informed that they were entering a place where they were valued for who they were by the simple act of changing clothes. In 1969, Rogers traveled to Washington, D.C., on May 1 and addressed a meeting of the U.S. Senate. The goal of President Nixon was to reduce public television funding from $20 million to $10 million. Rogers carefully described how that might harm kids. His show, which featured cartoons for less than 2 minutes, cost just $6,000 annually. Though he talked softly, he was quite emotional. He once used lyrics from his show as a quote. John Pastor, the listening senator, was known for his toughness. However, it appears that you have just earned the $20 million, he added in the end. It wasn't simply PBS that was saved. It demonstrated that a soft voice might have great impact. Rogers took another audacious move on May 9, 1969, just a few days later, but this time it was on the show. Francois Clemens, a black actor who portrayed a police officer, was invited to bathe their feet together in a little pool in episode 1065. Even though that scene seems straightforward now, segregation in public pools was a significant problem back then. Rogers didn't give lectures. He was merely kind. They pooled together. A towel was split between them. And it made the point extremely clear, everyone is deserving of respect. Thank you for everything, Rogers said as he privately cleaned Clemens' feet decades later. That one episode continues to be a silent but effective protest against prejudice. The show's popularity increased as more homes saw it. In 1968, the audience continued to grow after going nationwide. It achieved a 2.1% ratings share and had reached 1.8 million homes in the United States by 1985-86. It was a significant amount for a public television program. In addition to writing all of the show's scripts and puppets, Rogers also authored more than 200 songs and 13 operas. He created it from the ground up, not merely hosted it. Reruns persisted even after the final new episode aired in 2001. In PBS history, it grew to become one of the longest-running programs. But Rogers wasn't pleased with how children's television was going in general. Many shows, he feared, were more concerned with turning children into consumers than with fostering their development. One of his statements was, he didn't mean that as a compliment. He declined to promote toys or cereal on his show. Even Burger King's use of his likeness in a parody advertisement was prevented by him. Rogers focused on what children needed emotionally, whilst other shows were centered around products. He was unique because of it, and the commercial side of TV wasn't always fond of that. His ideals even showed in the way he ate. Early in the 1970s, Rogers switched to vegetarianism. Anything with a mother I don't want to eat, he said. He felt that non-human creatures should also be treated with kindness. His understanding of vegetarianism as a sign of love and respect was influenced by the book Diet for a Small Planet. To all living things. He never featured meat-eating people on his program. No burgers or fish were shown on screen if a scene was set in a restaurant. To condemn the custom of killing newborn chicks for Easter, he even composed a song. What made him who he was his empathy. Rogers also did something that most hosts of children's television wouldn't risk. The topics he discussed were difficult. In order to help kids comprehend what had happened, he broadcast a special episode just 2 days after Robert F. Kennedy was slain in June 1968. What is meant by assassination? The puppet Daniel Striped Tiger inquired. The question was not sidestepped by Rogers. He gave a straightforward and honest explanation. He addressed issues including divorce, racism, war, and death over the years. From the first week of the show, he was assisting kids in understanding a complex world. Speaking about frightening things, in his opinion, made them less frightening. Everything revolved around his belief in feelings. All emotions, including fear and rage, were okay, he assured the kids. He stated that anything that may be discussed can be handled more easily. He collaborated closely with child psychologists to ensure that the show addressed actual issues that children encountered. He did more than merely tell them they were unique. He demonstrated to them how to manage strong emotions. He ensured that they understood that they were loved simply for being themselves and provided them with the means to express themselves. Despite his reputation for having a soothing voice and a kind smile, Fred Rogers' life was everything but peaceful behind the scenes. From 1985 to 1990, there was a lot of humor, laughing, and surprise on the set of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Fred wasn't merely a composed host. The staff loved to tease him since he loved having fun. He was about to put on his sneakers when he entered one day singing his standard song. His shoes, however, did not fit when he tried. They were much too tiny. Nevertheless, Fred continued to sing until he started chuckling. It was a joke. One of the staff, Jeff, had traded his sneakers. The genuine ones? Jeff had them on. Everyone, even Fred, laughed. On another occasion, a lewd picture was left for Fred to discover. Rather than reprimanding him, Fred made a joke out of it. As a Christmas present to the crew member, he had it blown up into a gigantic poster. There was a spirit like that on set. When Fred retired in 2001, he later claimed that he missed his playmates more than anything else. The Neighborhood wasn't limited to television. It was joyful and full of love, and it was real. In 1985, Fred took an unexpected action. He introduced the musicians who made the show come to life as he left the well-known stage. They were more than background actors. They were skilled jazz musicians. Bobby Ross-Thorne on drums, Carl McVicker Jr. on bass, Joe Negri on guitar, and Johnny Costa on piano. They didn't play easy music. Every episode included live, authentic jazz performances. There was not even a script used by Johnny Costa. He simply followed the situation while keeping an eye on Fred. It gave the show a genuine sense. Fred didn't merely mention their names when he presented them on camera. He demonstrated to them how the magic was enhanced by each musician. Fred felt that children should know who made the show unique, even though it was uncommon to witness such candor on children's television. He used it to convey the message that every individual matters. Even though Fred Rogers was a clergyman, you might not know it if you watched his show. He never preached. Although he made no reference to God, his entire teaching was based on faith, patience, love, kindness, and listening. His TV show was his ministry, he thought. He was required by public TV regulations to keep it secular. Fred, however, managed to incorporate his beliefs into each episode. He spoke carefully and without fear about difficult topics including racism, divorce, death, and hardship. He treated every guest and child with dignity. That was how he lived out his faith. Despite never having seen the cross he silently carried in his heart, millions of people sensed it. It may surprise some people to hear that Fred Rogers was a Republican all of his life. That appears to be at odds with his message of acceptance and love. Party lines, however, didn't matter to Fred. He was a human being. His cause was public television. He supported aiding those in need. Later on, he was assailed by conservative media. According to them, he made children feel too special. But Fred continued. According to Joanne, his wife, Trump's ideals were completely at odds with Fred's. Had Fred lived longer, he could have switched parties. But ultimately, his deeds spoke louder than his voter registration. He demonstrated that kindness can come from any source. The actor Francois Clemens, who played Officer Clemens, was one of Fred's closest friends. When Fred cast him in 1968, he became the first black guy to have a regular part on children's television in the United States. There was a difficult period, but they were close, like family. When Fred found out Francois was gay, he begged him to keep it a secret. Being out and out gay could have ended your job at the time. Fred thought the show may be cancelled. He even urged Francois to get married, which he did, but the marriage ended in divorce. Fred expressed regret years later. He evolved, helped Francois, and accepted his companions. Their relationship remains solid. Fred didn't openly discuss LGBTQ concerns, but by casting Francois, taking a foot bath with him on air, and supporting him, he quietly conveyed love and change. Not every difficulty was internal. A terrible event occurred in 1990. To preach hate, the Ku Klux Klan started impersonating Fred Rogers. Although the messages on the cassettes sounded like they were from Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, they were harsh and bigoted. Even a lynching was described, aimed at kids who might share the number in school. Fred felt devastated. Instantly, his company filed a lawsuit. The Klan was ordered to halt and turn over all of the tapes by a federal judge within a day. Fred utilized the law as a weapon for the first time, but not for his own benefit. Children were to be shielded from hate that was passed off as charity. Fred was frequently mocked. Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood, starring Eddie Murphy, was among the most well-known. It didn't bother Fred. Though he had to intervene occasionally, he saw it as a loving joke. Burger King used a phony Mr. Rodney in an advertisement to promote their burgers in 1984. One courteous phone call was made by Fred. It vanished. That was all that was required. However, Fred didn't think twice about filing a lawsuit when someone went too far, such as using a gun on a t-shirt. He was unconcerned with ridicule. He was concerned about trust. Youngsters had faith in him. It was crucial. Fred Rogers lived out the values of compassion and love, not merely preaching them. He met Joanne Berg Rogers, a pianist and teacher, at Rollins College, and they were married for 49 years. He wrote a handwritten letter proposing in 1952. Joanne was so thrilled that she threw away the letter as she hurried to call and exclaim, "Yes, yes, yes." Their romance was subtle yet profound. The focus was not on dazzling moments. It was about common principles, trust, and respect. They brought up James and 2 sons, born in 1961, and John in 1959. Both made sporadic appearances on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and made the same statement. The man they saw on screen was their father. Through all of life's seasons, Joanne was by his side. He had her as his anchor. Fred frequently said that she helped him see clearly in difficult situations. People recalled Joanne's accomplishments and the importance she held for Fred when she died in 2021 at the age of 92. Fred was also very concerned about life with intention, as evidenced by his own small rituals. He maintained a precise weight of 143 pounds for more than 30 years. Why that figure? For him, it meant to love you. 3 letters in you, 4 in love, and 1 in I. After swimming each day, he weighed himself. If he put on or lost a pound, he would adapt. He became a part of that number. So much so that the state of Pennsylvania created a 143rd day of the year to commemorate his love message. Fred continued his routine beyond the scale. He prayed, read the Bible, swam laps, woke up before sunrise, napped, and went to bed by 9:30. He was not a drinker or smoker. He even drank Postum, a coffee substitute, in place of caffeine. Adding a dash of Kahlua to ice cream is his one guilty pleasure. It was that. Even meat was off limits to him, he reportedly said, "Don't eat anything that has a mother." Choosing self-control for self-indulgence, Fred was a quiet, peaceful rebel in a world full of TV celebrities with crazy habits. He broadcast his last program on August 31, 2001. 11 days later, the 9/11 attacks occurred, permanently altering the course of history. After 33 years and 895 episodes, Fred had already bid farewell. But after the disaster, he was once more required. So he returned for a short time to record special public statements. His counsel to seek out the helpers was consoling during a chaotic time. In addition to helping children, he helped the nation as a whole breathe. Fred had meticulously prepared the demise of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. One of his favorite themes during the last week of performances was the arts. Each farewell in those final episodes was deliberate. Even Lady Elaine. Everyone won an art contest award from the Mischief Maker puppet. And Fred concluded by saying, "Always make every day a special day," in a composed tone. By simply being who you are, you know how. He was aware that he would not last forever. He thus got ready for that as well. In order to help parents discuss loss and sadness with their children, he collaborated with psychologists. Sincerity, in his opinion, was preferable to softening harsh realities. He wanted them to understand that asking and feeling sad were acceptable. In late 2002, Fred began to experience stomach pain that didn't go away. When doctors finally looked inside, they discovered cancer that had spread, but Fred continued to go on. He was the Grand Marshal at the Rose Parade on January 1, 2003, his last public appearance. Shortly after the doctors removed his stomach, he stayed in the hospital for 10 days. When he got home, he played the piano. A few weeks later, Fred Rogers died at home in Pittsburgh on February 27, 2003, one day after his grandson's birthday. There was family all around him. Only 2 months have passed since his diagnosis. Fred left more than memories, but the nation grieved. He left behind a way of life, a code of silence, and the conviction that people are unique and that even small acts of kindness may make a big difference.